Okay, we're going to move on along now to Dr. Tim Nedwed. He's led the oil spill response research program at ExxonMobil, upstream research company. He did that for 17 years. He's currently ExxonMobil's oil spill response senior technical professional. Let's see, his presentation is going to be on, in quotes, burning tongue, new technology to enable offshore in-situ burn. And I think it's probably something different than the too many jalapenos I had on my lunchtime quesadilla. But Tim, you're ready to go?
Well, first off, I want to thank the organizers for this workshop. I've been coming to it for, gosh, over 10 years, maybe 12, 14 years now. And it's great. It's great to hear all the different research and in different stages of progress. And particularly this time and all the work that's been going on with in-situ burning is fantastic. I don't think I've heard so many talks about in-situ burning. It's something that I've been working on for quite some time. And so I'm going to talk about a concept that we've had in study now for about 2 years, and we call it the burning tongue, and you'll see why we call it that when I show you a picture on the next slide. But it's a concept, and I have to give kudos to Bessie and Karen Stone's work, because it's a concept that came out of some of the research that she described a couple hours ago, where they took a long, thin boom to try to improve the efficiency of burn by not having the air to have to travel so far to meet the center of the burn. And when I saw that research, it immediately struck me that, well, maybe we don't need the boom, and if we get a long, thin burning tongue, then we can do in-situ burning without the need for fire boom. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, is the research we've done on that. So the burning tongue, as I said, what it does is it allows in-situ burning without a fire boom and just using standard boom. And the next slide, I'll show you a picture. Or on a couple of slides, I'll show you a picture. But with this presentation, I want to just give you some background on in-situ burning. And I think just to make sure we all understand, and maybe we all do, but there's a couple of things that I highlight in this background that's important. Free-floating oil, not just for this burning tongue concept, but also for the use of herders and in-situ burning. And then I'll end up with the research and describing the burning tongue specifically and some of the work that we've done to prove the concept so far. So I think everyone knows this, but the reason you need fire boom or herders, or you need to make oils thick enough to burn, right? You lose too much heat to the water column if oil is left to spread to equilibrium thickness. So you could ignite, you could put an igniter on the oil if it's spread without containment in open water, but as soon as you took the igniter away and you lost the heat, you'd lose too much heat to the water column because you're burning the vapors and not the liquid, right? So you got to continuously produce more vapors. And so oil can burn if it's thick enough, but it also can burn. It also needs some other things that I think we've talked about today, but there has to be volatiles, it can't have weather too much. And if there's too much water, I think Paul and others talked about this already, that if there's too much water, you spend too much energy boiling the water, and then you lose the energy that's needed to continue to volatilize the compounds in the crude oil. But the efficiency of the burn depends on the oil thickness, but we've learned with some of the herder tests, and there's been research actually going back to the 80s by Ian Buist and Chantal Guenet, showing that this herding effect without, will cause, chimney effect, wind herding will cause oils to thicken without containment, right? And that's what we take advantage of in the burning tongue. And we heard this earlier, but thick oil layers burn at a rate of at least 2.5 millimeters per minute. So you have a slick that's 10 millimeters thick, for example, and when it's fully engulfed in flame, it's going to burn down actually quite quickly, right? And that would take, a 4-minute burn after it fully engulfs if the slick's only 10 millimeters thick. And the reason I think that's important to understand is because there is concern by stakeholders, and we did a drill, I guess it was in 2019 now, where we tried to use herders for a drill in the Gulf of Mexico, and there was concern by the stakeholders who are making the decision to endorse herders or not in in-situ burning. And their concern about endorsement was that it would be dangerous to be burning free-floating oil slicks in the Gulf of Mexico where there's a lot of oil and gas infrastructure, right? And the concern was that a lit oil slick was uncontrolled and it could float underneath an oil platform and ignite it on fire. Well, because of the speed of burning, right, 2.5 millimeters a minute, and you have an understanding of the thickness of an oil slick, a free-floating oil slick is not going to burn for more than 20 minutes, right? And so you can put some safety factors on it. So if you know your slick is an hour away from by travel on the open ocean because of winds and currents, then you know that you have an oil slick that is not going to burn, is not going to float up under some infrastructure and cause havoc. So there are some protocols that you can put in place to do burn free floating oil slicks because we know some of these fundamental things about oil slicks, burning oil slicks. So the burning tongue. This very simple drawing shows the burning tongue. I have a picture. Well, this is it, right? So we use conventional boom pulled by whatever vessels need to be pulling the boom. So we don't need fire boom. So the difference here is that at the apex of the boom, we have kind of an electronically controlled or a wirelessly controlled gate that can open and close to allow oil. So you thicken oil at the apex. And when you open the gate, you get thick oil, and that's the burning tongue, right? And so the idea is to ignite the oil, and we have been developing, and Scott Pagal's going to talk in the next talk, this jet ski system that is basically a flamethrower on water that sprays gelled gasoline and has a huge capacity for spraying gelled gasoline. So that's what I show here, but any system that could ignite the oil as soon as it leaves the boom, and then the oil is going to be traveling down current as the boats pull the oil slick away. And so we get it ignited quickly. A fully engulfed flame can happen within 30 seconds to a minute or so, depending on the oil. And then we don't need containment anymore because of the chimney effect. And I'll show you at the end of the talk some images from the Macondo incident where they actually had oil that escaped damaged fire boom and was burning successfully outside of the boom. So we know that the concept of burning free-floating oil slicks, a number of tests that have been done in the past, and also during the Deepwater Horizon incident, we know that free-floating oil slicks can burn. So why is this a good idea? It's because fire boom is a logistical challenge to deploy. And I tell people this, the only time in-situ burning offshore has been an operational tool is during the Deepwater Horizon incident. And that's because of the nature of that incident with fresh oil coming up every day. It allowed this logistically challenging equipment to be deployed. But other than that, in-situ burning has not been an offshore oil spill response operational tool. It was tested for, I think, one burn during the Valdez incident back in '89. So you can see it's not a tool that's used very often, and there's a number of reasons for that, but the logistics are one of the reasons. And so if we can burn without having to use logistically challenging fire boom, then maybe in-situ burning can be a tool that is used more often. So I mentioned these things. We use conventional boom, but the idea is to corral the slick and get it thick. And I'll show you a graphic that I show at the end, but oil at the base of a completely full boom will be on the order of the thickness of the boom, right? We talked about the hydraulics of oil in a boom yesterday. And so when a boom is completely full, the thickness at the base, at the apex, is approximately the thickness of the skirt of the boom, roughly, depending on the speed that the boom's being pulled. But that means that the oil can be maybe 2 feet thick, at least at the apex. And so when you open up the gate, you have thick oil to begin with. And then I said this immediately ignite, and within a few tens of seconds, the finger of oil will engulf. Convective winds will keep that oil burning and actually continue to cause hurting because of the convective currents that are required that the fire itself produces that feed the flames. And in fact, these winds are coming in radially across the water surface and help keep the oil thick or even thicken it. There's been research done before by several researchers showing the free-floating oil slicks, and I mentioned the Deepwater Horizon incident. And then there's also the evidence that Karen Stone described where they did these long, thin fire booms, but the evidence that, in fact, maybe these burns can be more efficient because the air that's feeding the base of the fire and in the center of the flame doesn't have as far to travel. In a standard conventional burn in a boom, you have these kind of dimensions that means that the center of the burn can be quite challenged as far as oxygen. So we completed testing at an OMSET in June of 2019, and I'll show you some of the videos, some of the tests that we did, and some of the data that we collected. In fact, Paul Panetta used his sonic systems to measure the speed of sound in our slicks while we were generating the burning tongue so we could determine how thick they were. And I'll show you some of that data. Unfortunately, that's kind of the last bit of test because in 2020 with the lockdowns, this technology, the development of this technology was kind of been put on hold, and it's been sitting on hold till now, but we hope to pick it back up again as we start moving forward with things. So our next step is to build a larger full-scale system. And in fact, it is on the program for the MPRI field demonstration that might happen in August of this year to be tested in the field. So we're very excited if that can happen. So we did tests in June of 2019 at the OMSET facility. And before I describe exactly what we did, just beware that we used the boom that was available there, which is this very small harbor boom, if it's even that, right? So it doesn't have a very high freeboard. It's maybe 6 or 8 inches off of the water. And then the skirt is very shallow. I think it's maybe 6 or 8 inches below the water surface. And then because of just the challenges of using a lot of oil in each one of these tests and the challenges of cleaning up the tank, we didn't actually even fill up this boom. So the amount of oil that's at the apex of this boom, or the thickness of the oil at this apex of boom, is probably it's much thinner than it would be in a full-scale test in the field. But what we did is we put these two boom pieces, and then you can barely see it here, but at the apex is a simple gate system that's actually manually controlled by pulling a string from the auxiliary gate or auxiliary bridge at the OMSET facility. So the boom is tied off on each end to the bridge, and we simply pulled the boom down while we released oil into it to run these tests. And then what we did for these tests, we're not going to ignite oil at the OMSET facility. What we did is we had Paul's instrument sitting on this little grid. This red grid it's on the bottom of the OMSET tank, and it's measuring, it's taking real-time measurements of the thickness of the oil slick of this burning tongue as it moves past, as the boom is pulled away from the instruments. And so this data in this chart, on this graph down here, shows the slick thickness is measured by the instruments that Paul put into the tank over time, right? And time 0 is when we opened up the gate. And so our goal with these tests, and remember these were biased tests because the slicks weren't as thick as I think they could have been even in these tests if we used more oil, or they would be in the field if we had full-size ocean-going boom with maybe a 2-foot or even a meter thick skirt. But the goal was to show that for at least 30 seconds, and we had this going for over, 2 minutes at least, that we could keep oil over 3 millimeters thick, right? So you can see even before we opened the gate, as I mentioned, the oil wasn't that thick in the apex of the boom, 6 millimeters or 7 millimeters maybe, some of these. But then we opened the gate, and then down here you can see at 120, 150, 160 seconds, we still had oil that was thick enough to get ignited. And then the idea is once we get the fully engulfed flame going, we get the chimney effect, and we'll actually get self-hurting, and the oil will continue to thicken on its own and allowing effective burns where we expect that we could get maybe 90+% burn from this concept even for this type of test where we had thin oil to begin with. So we learned a couple of interesting things during the study, and I have a couple of videos here, and I'll show you those. First, this boom was quite challenged of even holding oil at I think maybe this video shows the test at 3/4 of a knot. But this is the gate, and there's a string here. You'll see it open in a few seconds. So as I said, you just pulled a little latch and the gate fell into the water. But the interesting thing is how this oil is being entrained under our little boom. But the interesting thing, and you'll see it better on the next video, is the oil didn't kind of go whichever direction it wanted to, right? It all collected where we wanted it. Now the gate's open, you can see it, and even more oil's coming out. But the oil, because of this, and this was talked a little bit yesterday with Kevin and others about the hydrodynamics of a boom, but the oil didn't spread. It was actually thickened because of the nature of pulling this boom, right? And the boom is actually pulling the surface water away, and it leaves kind of a slight vacuum upon it that gets filled by the water from the sides, and you'll see this better on the next video. But that's one reason that booms fail and oil gets entrained under them, because the water is being filled underneath the boom as well, and it can pull the oil with it if the oil thickness is too great. And so this video shows it even better. You can see the surface currents cause the nature of this boom kind of pulling leaving a convergence zone as it's pulled forward. So the boom is moving, right? We're in the reference of the movement of the boom, because I think I was standing on the auxiliary bridge when I took this video. But you can see the gate is letting oil out, but all the oil that was entrained under the boom is also coming into this convergence zone and being thickened naturally by the movement of the boom, which was, sometimes you do these tests and it's not something, maybe if we thought hard enough about it, we would have thought of it, but we didn't think about it until we actually saw this convergence zone happening during the test, which is kind of a beneficial thing for our experiments. So I mentioned this at the beginning, and I want to show this because I learned this in October of 2019 because Al Allen, who I think many people know, he actually came to Galveston and gave his in-situ burn course for MSRC, and I attended. And if you ever get a chance to attend one of his courses, you should. The slides that he describes and all the technology he describes and the experiences that he has. But the best thing about Al's course is between his talks when he starts describing some of the escapades he's had. And with this slide, I try to describe one. So Al, between one of his talks on the, in his course about in-situ burning, he described this idea that oil at the apex of a completely filled boom would be roughly as thick as the skirt of the boom, right? And I try to depict that here, right? So this is my idea of a completely filled boom. And you can just envision that if it's pulled any faster, you'd start entraining oil underneath the boom, right? And exactly what that speed is and everything is depends, but it's roughly 3/4 to 1 knot in the ocean. But Al in the 70s decided that he wanted to test his theory of how thick oil was at the apex of a boom. So this is my little conceptual drawing of Al Allen. And what he did is he convinced the captain of a vessel that was pulling boom and actually had it filled with oil. He convinced that captain to let him snorkel in the water. And so Al went into the water, underneath the boom, and observed and confirmed this thickness before. And the boat was pulling the boom at roughly 1 knot. The boom was completely full. So he observes that the oil was at near the base of the skirt. And so the oil was as thick as the skirt as he thought. So he confirmed that in the field, we could have much thicker oil than we did in our experiment that we had at offset. But another interesting thing that Al said, and if you ever talk to Al Allen, he has these near-death experiences and he has more lives than a cat. But what happened is Al, while he was snorkeling, got pulled up against the skirt. And when this boat was pulling at 1 knot, and he was stuck, his body was stuck up against, and he couldn't pull himself off because there was so much force from the water. And luckily, the captain of the boat noticed that his snorkel wasn't coming up and stopped the motors and quit pulling that boom forward. Otherwise, Al would not be with us today. And because of that, he was able to release himself and come up and get air because he thought he was a goner. And I thought that was really an interesting story. And that's really kind of one of many stories from Al of where he's kind of survived things when he didn't necessarily expect to. So just to summarize this thing, and I think I'm going to give some time back here, is, conventional booms we think can be used for in-situ burning to eliminate the need for these logistically challenging heavy fire boom. And not only logistically challenging, they're quite expensive, and then they have a limited life. I think that the booms that were used, and I think every variety of boom that was on the market was used in 2010. And I think the best one was able to do 8 burns before it was destroyed because of the intensity from those fires. I mentioned this, there's been a couple of researchers that did work back in the 80s and 90s, but free floating oil can burn as long as you can get it ignited before it spreads too thin, right? And so this image here is from the Deepwater Horizon incident, and this fire boom was a conventional fire boom. You can see the boats and there's fire boom there, but the boom was damaged and it was allowing burning oil to be released from it. And that's what these pockets of oil are back here. And the observations, and these are Al Allen's observations, that oil continued to burn for a significant period of time, indicating that a significant amount of the oil was burned. And then I mentioned this, that the onset testing found that there's a convergence zone that we didn't anticipate, but we should have maybe, behind the boom that actually enhanced our ability to thicken oil and keep it thick. And our slicks in the negatively biased test that we did remained thick in the order of 3 to 5 millimeters for over 3 minutes during our test. So we're quite pleased with this. As I said, our plans now are to build a full-scale prototype, or two full-scale prototypes, in fact, that we can remotely open and close and test them during the field trials that are hopefully going to happen this summer off the east coast of Canada. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ellen, and I guess I've saved some time for questions, but thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim. Just a comment from me. I see that we have one question coming from you, and I'll just be a little bit probably unprofessional here, but I think there's a sense, maybe from a more general community that, industry research, can't be trusted. It won't be scientific. It won't be robust. It will have ulterior motives. And I think you, as well as a lot of our other industry partners, just continue to demonstrate over the years that you're the real deal. You do good work. You do good, consistent work. You bring good science to the table, and you like to play. You like to play with new ideas. You like to push us along a bit. And I think that is just incredibly valuable. So thank you for all your contributions over the years.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. I tell people, we interview people for jobs. People like to come to work for ExxonMobil, and I always tell them that the best job there is, right? I have a PhD. I could have gone out in the academic world, and there would have been a completely different set of challenges that I have to deal with. Or I could work as a PhD closer to the operations of a company like ExxonMobil, and there's another different set of challenges. But I sit in between, right, at the research company, right? So I don't have the pressures of operations, right? My work isn't going to shut down a $1 million a day drilling operation, for example, if I do something that didn't meet the schedule. And then I don't have the challenges of kind of continuing to have to ask and get money and grant money as I would if I was an academic. And the company, ExxonMobil, has, and it's not that they're altruistic, right? We have the Heritage Valdez incident that's kept somebody like me in business for a long time, but it's allowed me to come, like this idea came up in, I think, of April of 2019, and I got the resources to start doing without having to go through a con, writing a proposal and waiting for grant funding and everything. So I got the resources to do these basic tests right away, right? So I kind of sit in the best of both worlds as far as this kind of research, because I do have access to the oil spill response operations folks, and they are good sounding boards for ideas like this, and it really helps these kind of ideas pass the lab tests from those guys, right? And if they do, you're onto something, because they're not shy about telling you the truth when you tell them a new idea, and they've killed many of my ideas in the past.
All right, thanks, Tim. Lindsay, do we have any more structured questions for Tim?
Yes, we have one question from James Mitchell. Could you introduce a herding agent into the boom that would float and maintain the thickness of that tongue of oil as it moves downstream?
Yeah, no, we could do that. I'm not sure how we would do it, right? Because the herder is actually working. Herders actually, I've been working on herders since 2004. Herders actually are used to affect the surface chemistry of the water around the perimeter of an oil slick, right? So you'd want to have the surfactants from the herders placed on downstream where the tongue is going, and not necessarily inside the boom where the tongue was, right? Because you can also have the opposite effect with herders. If you have these surfactants, if they have to actually start interacting with the oil, they do the opposite of what you want them to do and change the surface tension, interfacial tension of the oil, and will actually cause the oil to push back, even though the water surface has low surface tension. So you have to be very careful. So I'm not sure that's a very practical thing. Even if you decided it was a good idea, I'm not sure it could be implemented very well. But I'll tell you, kind of one of the fundamental things that I've learned about oil spill response, and speaking with the oil spill response community, and just understanding, trying to get things over the commercial hurdle from kind of idea, generating an idea and actually making it a commercial technology that the response community will actually use, right? It's a huge challenge, and I think anybody who's done this for a while understands that. But one of the things I've learned is that unless you have a kind of a step change advance in efficiency for oil spill response, complicating the response is not going to be accepted, right? That's why, that's why in-situ burning is not used, hasn't been used very often, is because it's too complicated, right? The fire booms are too expensive, but not just they're too expensive, they're too logistically challenging to deploy. So anything that makes things more complicated than necessary is certainly, I don't think, going to be accepted. So I think what the burning tongue is able to do and get 90+% burn efficiency and do it with equipment that's stockpiled all over the place, that trying to complicate it with something else is not necessary and wouldn't be acceptable, as I said, unless it really improved efficiency. And I'm not sure herders would do that. And then you have the whole other challenge of just trying to get approval for putting a surfactant or a chemical into the water in addition, right? So now you got burning and the challenges we have with perception of burning and smoke plumes and other things. And then we add to that the challenges of what people believe are issues as far as putting a surfactant or a chemical into the water as well. So I'm not sure that would be a good way to go.
So my apologies, to backtrack on that. James Mitchell's question was, could you introduce a wicking compound into the oil, into the boom that would float and maintain the thickness of the tongue as it moves downstream?
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody told me what the wicking compound was, but again, I think my previous response is if that can be done without complicating things, which I'm not sure if you're going to have to put a supply of whatever this wicking compound is and carry that around, which challenges things, right? Even slightly challenging things is not necessarily the way to go if what we're proposing here does the job by itself.
Thanks. No
Alrighty.
further questions.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay,